Welcome, everyone. You are listening to the Votes and Seats Podcast episode of the Center for Political Science at Mathias Corvinus Collegium. My name is Szabolcs Janik, researcher of the Center. In today's episode, we will discuss the results and potential political consequences of last week's Polish legislative election. And I have the honor to welcome Mr. Tomasz Grosse, who is a professor of the Faculty of Political Science and International Studies at the University of Warsaw. Professor, thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you for having me on.
And my first question sounds as follows. If you look at the results of the election, what do you find the most surprising and why?
First of all, of course, we have very high turnout of the election, and it was surprising for majority of observers and political scientists. Secondly, the huge votes for liberal grouping, so-called third way, which is clearly winner of that competition, of that election. And third, the most surprising result of the election is very low support for right-wing party Confederation, which is strongly Eurosceptic, also Ukrainian skeptic party. Sometimes, at least part of that party is also open for some kind of reconciliation with Russia. So it is quite extraordinary, taking into consideration the Polish political landscape. But still, the result of that party was far under the expectation, taking into consideration at least some polls, some social surveys published before election.
And how would you explain? What's your clue for this high election turnout? Why did this happen? Were the parties successful beyond the previous expectations in mobilizing their voters, or what happened? What is your opinion?
It is, as I mentioned, quite extraordinary, taking into consideration the modern history of Polish democracy. It was the highest turnout ever in Polish elections. And the basic reason was very high mobilization of liberal and left-wing electorate, particularly in big cities, including young voters. So students and other younger voters usually not attend so frequently in election, but this time it was quite extraordinary. Younger generation of Poles came to vote massively, and majority of them supported liberal and left-wing parties. It was, of course, the basic reason of that mobilization was political campaign developed by pro-European or opposition coalitions, opposition parties towards current government, right-wing government. But the reason of very high turnout also could be related to governmental campaign. So it was presumably a mistake in governmental campaign, which resulted in strong mobilization of opposition parties and their electorate.
Yes, you mentioned that the great winner was Third Way in this election, and maybe we can somehow add the Civic Coalition, which could also improve its vote share compared to the previous election. And if we consider the losers of this election, you already referred to Confederation, but what about the Law and Justice? Did they do their best in this voting, or maybe they had some reserves in the electorate which they could not mobilize, or how do you see the position of the governing party?
Taking into consideration that manifolds that ruling parties committed during electoral campaign, it was in fact successful result for them because still governmental coalition established for three parties, which the most important is, of course, Law and Justice Party, leading by Mr. Kaczynski. Still, it is the number one result in that election, but this result is not so large that or so big that could afford to government to continue governing. So it is almost impossible for Law and Justice and the supporters supporting smaller parties to establish a new government in that new parliament. So in fact, that kind of success is a failure or is transferring the power to opposition parties, left-wing and liberal parties, which presumably regain the government in Poland. And it is interesting to raise a question: what was basic reasons for that result? I mean, the change of government in Warsaw. First of all, it was related to growing mobilization of liberal and left-wing part of Polish society, which were tired a little bit with second tenure of Law and Justice and smaller right-wing parties. So we would say that after 8 years of governing, of course, government committed some mistakes, and it was difficult time for them to rule, because we have money crisis, including COVID crisis, huge inflation, some problems for economy, and for sure it might be disadvantages for many groups of Polish society. And it is the first or second reason why it was even more difficult to continue to rule for previous right-wing government. But it was also related to some mistakes which government committed during campaign. So we would say that there are at least three basic mistakes which are responsible for that result. First of all, creators of governmental coalitions campaign were focused too much on negative campaign and attacks on particularly Donald Tusk. It was the first result of that activity was huge polarization among the voters, but also it resulted in a huge jump in voter turnout. So that we would say that government is responsible to some extent for increasing voter turnout, which was a huge source or reason for collapsing the government after the election. Secondly, the second mistake is related to centrist electorate, which was neglected by government. The third way party was omitted by governmental campaign, was not criticized, was not referred to any comment, especially relating to some proposals for next government. And it was mistake because in fact the politicians from third way, without any activity of government, was free to we would say to free right to increase support by voters. The mistake is even more important because, in fact, to continue ruling, the government should exclude third way. If that party, the third way, could not pass the threshold during election, and it was such a possibility, then the result would be much beneficial for governmental parties. But that neglect, as I mentioned, was rather beneficial for centrist party. In addition, increasing voter turnout also produced better result for third way. And finally, the third mistake was that at the end of the campaign, the government attacked its potential coalition partner, which is a right-wing Confederation party. And it was it resulted in two consequences, which of course hit at governmental potential to continue ruling. The first consequence is that Confederation leading politicians were against any possibility to go into coalition with Law and Justice in a future government. So that attack make it difficult or even impossible to negotiate any future coalition with Confederation. And the second result was that we observed huge flow of voters between Confederation Party and Third Way at the end of campaign. So it was presumably affected by governmental attack on Confederation, and some part of voters potentially not voted for Confederation, but also not for Law and Justice, but for the Third Way, which resulted in success of opposition camp. So but those three mistakes are responsible for success of opposition parties, and it is really interesting because, in fact, Law and Justice has some possibility to continue ruling, to regain power and have a third cadency of government, but those three mistakes presumably are responsible for that failure.
If we look at the opposition bloc and the campaign they conducted over the past months, what were their key campaign promises, campaign topics, campaign slogans, and which of these worked the most, in your opinion? Which were the most successful in mobilizing their potential voters?
The most important was anti-governmental campaign. So the most important topic and target for opposition politicians was to remove Law and Justice government from power, oust them of the office. So it was the number one and the most important for electorate to mobilize voters to simply have another not Law and Justice government. The second important motive of the electorate campaign was to stay in the EU, because they try to convince Law and Justice politicians for conflicts with Brussels, conflicts with Berlin and other Western European capitals. So they also the opposition parties try to convince electorate they could re-establish good relationship with Western partners, and particularly they could stop the process of exiting of Poland from the EU. So, in my opinion, it was the second most important aspect of that successful narrative, including also the narrative related to European funds. For instance, Donald Tusk many times promised they could unblock European funds if they regain the power.
And if we look, okay, this was the larger picture and the most important campaign topics from the side of the opposition bloc. But if you look at some maybe more specific promises or even the party manifestos of the three opposition powers. How could they how compatible could they be in practice, and how much political and policy compromise will they need during the coalition negotiations, which, according to the news, are already underway?
Of course, it is difficult to predict, but you are right that we can observe many differences between left-wing and centrist groupings, which could establish future left and liberal Polish government, but still they have some common program, particularly related to re-establishing good ties with Brussels, with Berlin. So we should expect strongly pro-European and pro-German future government. And they also could focus on some kind of internal revenge with law and justice politicians. And they also agree that that it is important to make right-wing politicians responsible at the courts for their mistakes, for their they call authoritarian governing, and many mistakes they committed during 8 years of ruling. So presumably they could explain to the audience that any problems are related to mistaken policy of previous right-wing government. They could also show that serious faults and responsibility of previous governmental ministers, and it would also mobilize those parties to have the common front, also in internal grounds.
And if you think about the Polish economy, what do you think? Would they reverse or kind of undo the social welfare policies or measures taken by the peace government? Would Tusk risk to do so, or how could they agree? Because we have here a left political power, why the two other ones could be rather considered to be centrists or slightly right-wing parties in terms of their economic policy. What is your expectation in this regard? And more broadly speaking, what could be the most striking and most visible difference compared to a potential new Tusk, or compared to the previous peace governments, if you think of a new potential Tusk administration to come in the near future?
It is difficult to say regarding the social programs which were introduced by Law and Justice government. If the new liberal and left government could continue the same social programs, or rather would cut them. We have contradictory views presented by various parties which establish a new coalition. So it is difficult to answer the question. Presumably, it might be related to condition of public finances. If they would deteriorate, maybe they also could cut some social program assistance to most disadvantaged citizens, which of course are also right-wing voters. So it would be in fact detrimental to liberal and left-wing new government, to their public popularity among some group of Polish society, particularly. But of course, it is as I said, it is difficult to predict. Taking into consideration the foreign policy, we should expect strongly pro-European and pro-Berlin foreign policy. So that if, for instance, Germans propose any activity in international relations regarding Moscow, Ukraine, or some other issues, including the future of European integration, we should expect strong support from new Polish government.
And just to inform our dear listeners, the Polish president can play and actually does play a prominent role in the process of change of government according to the Polish constitution. What do you think? How will President Duda behave in this process? And looking into the future, if possible to any extent, what will be his strategy under a new Tusk government, which is the most probable scenario for the time being? How will the president behave in political terms?
I expect two policies regarding new government. The first one is related to postponing the creation of new government. So I expect the Polish president could prolong all possible procedures which are important to establish new government in Poland. And the second policy, in my view, would be to defend all important achievements by previous right-wing government, which he declared he could defend, for instance, by his veto power in legislative process in Polish parliament. So those two policies I expect from President Duda.
And in your opinion, what could be the possible consequence of such confrontation by the president? Will the governability of the country get into danger as a result of this say cohabitation in this institutional arrangement you have in Poland? What do you think? Duda is in power until 2025, as far as I know, and maybe he is not able to apply for another term because he has already, by the time he will have already served his 2 terms. So what is your expectation in this regard?
Of course, it might be a very turbulent time for Polish democracy, and strong rivalry between government camp and the president office, supported by a huge opposition party, the largest in Polish parliament.
And my final question would be, how do you see the future of the Hungarian-Polish bilateral relations under a new Tusk administration in the future? And more generally, or at another more abstract level, is a change in government a positive or a negative development for the Visegrad Group? as such? What do you think?
First of all, I expect deterioration of Polish-Hungarian relationship because Donald Tusk and their advisors responsible for foreign policy, for European policy, many times criticized Viktor Orbán and friendly Polish-Hungarian relations during Law and Justice time. So the second question related to Visegrad Group, it is more difficult. In general, Donald Tusk and his supporters not believe in Central European cooperation and don't have the same level of support for those projects like previous government. Right-wing and conservative politicians strongly supported the cooperation in Visegrad Group as well as in the initiative, Three Seas initiative. So, including bilateral cooperation between Budapest and Warsaw. From the perspective of new left and liberal government, that aspect of foreign policy is clearly less important. So I don't expect that it would be some breakthrough or some new opening of Visegrad meetings. It might be some continuation, but without any strong support, without heart giving to that kind of cooperation.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your answer and for sharing your thoughts about the recent Polish legislative election. And dear listener, thank you for following our discussion, and please stay tuned for the upcoming Votes and Seats episodes. Goodbye, everyone.